Well, 2 years ago, I had an experience that still gives me a fair bit of anxiety to talk about. I know it's gonna start off like a hunting story, but I assure you, it is, in fact, a car story. This took place in early fall, and my son had turned 12 over the summer. And here in Wisconsin, that's the legal hunting age, and I wanted to give him the opportunity to try out bow hunting. If he liked it, awesome. If not, well, that's okay too. You don't know unless you try it. It turns out he did like it, and this is during the height of COVID, so schools were shut down, and it really gave us a ton of time to spend with each other. So we went out to sit in the bow stand one evening, and we were about a quarter mile apart with some two-way radios, so I could check in on him, and if he got one, I could come track it. It was close to dusk. It was a dead calm evening, and way off in the distance, I could hear this V8 coming with no exhaust. Wah! Wah! Silence for a little bit. And then again, wah! Silence. This went on for a good 10 minutes, getting closer and closer every time you heard it. Being that I rebuilt transmissions here for several years, I knew that sound to be the telltale sign of something with a 700R4 or 406DE in it, with a smoke 3/4 clutch pack. You wind her up as fast as she'll suffer in second gear until it neutrals itself out on its shift to third gear. And when it coasts back down slow enough again, it'll re-grab second. And you repeat that process until you get where you're going, preferably the transmission shop. From the stand I was in, I could vaguely make out what was going past on the road there, kind of through the trees. The best I could make out was some 80s full-size car, with the trunk lid wide open, piled with crap, and like this bundle of something about 6 foot long sticking straight out of the back. A few days later, I told my neighbor down the road, Howie, about this, and he said, yeah, that guy's a friend of my hired man, and for the sake of this story, we'll call Howie's hired man Marvin, because I don't want any backlash coming back from this story. The guy's from like 2 hours away and had been staying with Marvin for a few days. It's a mid-80s Monte Carlo SS. The tranny's bad, and this guy's trying to sell it. So that got me excited because my first car was an 85 Monte SS that I drove home from like an hour away when I was 15 years old, before I had my driver's license. And after getting my license, I drove it to school for a year or so, or probably not even that long, before old Uncle Rodney came to visit, and that was the end of the old 305. I ended up selling it to Howie's son Keith, who's been my best friend since we were little kids. Keith was looking for a roller to build something for the quarter mile at the time, so I ended up selling it to him. A few days after talking to Howie about this car, my brother Larry sends me a Snapchat from the auto parts store parking lot, and it's this maroon Monte Carlo SS with all the crap hanging out of the back. So I immediately called my brother and told him, hey, grab one of my business cards off the counter in the parts store and give it to this guy. Have him give me a call. So my brother grabbed one of my cards and went to talk to this guy. And turns out this guy doesn't have a cell phone, so there's no way he can call me. So my brother calls me back, and I told him, well, just have him wait there for 15 minutes, and I'll fly up there because I'm interested in the car. So I jumped in the truck and hightailed it to town and met with this character that I can best describe looks and dresses like the snowman from Smokey and the Bandit.
Nice ass. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
You can clearly tell that this dude is living out of this car with, everything he owns packed in it. Like the driver's seat was the only thing that wasn't packed to the ceiling. He said the fuel pump was leaking real bad, and they didn't have one in stock at the parts store there, so he was just hanging out there kind of planning his next move, I guess. Now in my head I'm thinking, if I buy this gem, what are we going to do? Unload all this stuff in the CarQuest parking lot and we just part ways? I thought about it for a little bit, and then I remembered I was at the sports shop a few days before that my friend owns just down the road here. The owner, Jeff, called me to come rescue his grandpa's 64 Fairlane out of an old barn that may or may not collapse at any time, and he was just never going to get to the project. After I got the car loaded up, I went inside the sports shop to ask Jeff about a couple parts that were missing or where they were or whatever. And Another neighbor was in there, I don't know, buying some stuff, and he had asked me if I haul away old cars. Since I had my truck and trailer there, he said his daughter's old beater had been taking up space in his driveway and he'd like to get it out of there. I declined since space is at somewhat of a premium here at my 1 acre in the woods, and I had no use for a mid 2000s beater car. So remembering about that car, I suggested to the snowman here that I get this car for him and we can make a deal on a trade and he'll have something to drive or live in or whatever. And I can maybe get this thing for little to nothing. I called Jeff and got the guy with the beater car's number, and of course, he didn't answer. So I told the snowman to swing by my shop later in the day and maybe I'll have a car for him. I really didn't want to tell this guy where I lived or bring him to my shop, but hey, I don't want to miss out on a cheap car, right? So I headed back home, and on the way there, the guy with the beater called me back and said it wasn't available anymore. He got rid of it already. So after I got back to the shop here, a few hours passed, and I get a call from a different guy. He said he had a fella there that was looking for my place in kind of an unsure voice. I think maybe he was catching some sort of weird vibes off him, or I don't know. He was just a couple miles away, and I gave him directions how to get the rest of the way here. Now, on the first encounter there at the parts store with this guy, I caught a really strange vibe, and it just made me feel uneasy, and I consider myself to be a pretty good judge of character. So, in preparation for the snowman's arrival, I kind of made it a point to be outside so as to not invite him into the shop here, and I had a horde of Studebaker parts on the trailer that I had bought a few days before that needed to be unloaded anyway. I locked the dog into the entryway there, and if you don't know Bruce, he's probably the best home security system in Levis Township, let me tell you. Now, I'm not a paranoid carry everywhere wingnut, but I did grab my concealed carry 9mm and put it in my inside belt holster. It's super compact and discreet, and there's no way he'd notice I had it on me. And yes, Karen, I do have a permit. Before long, you hear the wah coming up the driveway. He comes rolling in, shuts her down, and gas is just pouring out of the front of the car. He easily dumped at least a gallon in the driveway, and I can only imagine how much he lost on the way there. And it's nothing less than a miracle that it didn't burn down because the exhaust is broken off right at the Y pipe, and the whole underside of the car is just covered in gas. So we small talk for a little bit, and I tell him, hey, sorry, that car is no longer available, and maybe I can just buy it outright from you. I asked if he had the title and stuff, so he dug around in the car for a little while and found it. It was all good. And I asked what he had to have for it. He threw out a ridiculous number, and I respectfully declined. And then he asked how much I would charge him to rebuild his transmission, and I obliged with a pretty high number. For those of you that run any service-based business, you know that this is how we pick and choose our customers. And with the vibes I was catching off this guy, I didn't want to go down that road. He then asked me if I'd barter, and I figured out what the hell, let's see what he's got to offer. He first pulls out a couple of old Stoner Crocs and sets them on the top of the car. And he's digging around in the back seat that's stacked to the ceiling, you know, and produces this frickin' gnarly looking dagger. It's got a handle on it in the shape of an Egyptian pharaoh. Now the blade on this thing's like 14 inches long and comes to just a wicked point. And he's standing in front of me, in my bubble, uncomfortably close. A feeling of just sheer panic and terror just washes over me, and I kind of lock up a little bit as he's explaining to me that this is an authentic Egyptian dagger out of King Tut's tomb. Bullshit. And I can't help to notice a little bit of dried blood at the base of this thing that he's casually scraping off with his fingernail as he's explaining what this thing is. So I try to put some distance between us by slowly stepping away, acting like I'm looking over the car, and this guy is stuck to my side like glue. All the while thinking to myself, if this guy decides he's gonna put this blade through me, there's no way in hell I'd have time to react and draw my pistol, and I certainly don't want to provoke this guy by going for it. I've got a couple customers and friends in law enforcement and told them about this, and they're like, yeah, you wouldn't have a chance. They informed me of the 21-foot rule. That's the distance related to the time it would take an officer to recognize the threat, draw their sidearm, and fire against an attacker charging with a knife. So at 1 or 2 feet, I didn't have a prayer. So after a couple laps around the car with him glued to my side, looking it over, he finally sets the dagger on the roof. And I very, very politely tell him I really like his car, but I just don't have the money to afford it. And that I was banking on getting that other car to trade. Now he's been there for like at least an hour and I can't seem to shake him. I make a comment about the dog that's staring at us through the window this whole time. That he's aggressive and I have to keep him locked up when people come over. He's never harmed anyone, but there's been plenty of folks that just stopped in and won't get out of their car because he's got a dog door and he comes in and out as he pleases, and people pull in and he flies out like he's nuts barking. I've even had parts deliveries purposely left on my neighbor's porch over here because the delivery driver too scared to come in the driveway and don't want to deal with the dog. So he does a pretty good job of keeping the riffraff out of here. Eventually I convince him that I really need to get back to work. And he finally leaves. I headed inside and tell the missus about all this, and she can sense how rattled I was, and she'd never seen me that way before. The rest of the night I couldn't help but think if he was going to come back and kill us in our sleep or whatever. A day or two later I tell the neighbor Howie about my encounter, and he's like, yeah, Marvin kicked him out because he didn't trust him. Mind you, at the time this is being recorded, Marvin's in prison for assault or stabbing or something of the sort. And I've heard plenty of other stories about Marvin involving baseball bats, guns, that type of stuff. So if Marvin doesn't trust this guy, yeah, you get the picture. That's the first and hopefully the last time I've ever felt actually scared for my life. If you've never experienced anything like that, it's different, let me tell you. If you like that story, check out this one and subscribe for more to come. Thanks for watching.